Hi there, and welcome to Central Texas Gardener. I'm Tom Spencer. From my own experience, I know how hard it is to visualize a garden in an overgrown or even a blank space. Well, today, landscape architect Robert Leeper explains how to see its potential by starting with a few basic questions. On tour, let's see how Maria and Alan Palmer started from scratch.
In 1985, Maria and Alan Palmer fell in love with land they found in Fredericksburg. Although it was many years before they made it their permanent home, from the first day they saw one of its biggest selling points.
Here we found that the soil was deep and we could grow things and not have as many deer.
But now it's a different landscape than the one that attracted their attention with its fields of oak trees.
A year after we bought it, we noticed a lot of the oak trees dying, and oak wilt went through the whole acreage, and we lost hundreds and hundreds of huge live oak trees. So we were left with virtually a field with mesquite trees in it, which was really, really sad.
So when they built their house in 2001, they designed it for energy efficiency against untamed sun. The wide open space also forced a new look at garden design. They wanted a strong connection with the land, but at the same time denote their personal nest. With mesquite cleared from the land, Alan built structures for a sense of enclosure to counterpoint their spacious views.
And from there we just started
Keep going.
continuing on and on.
It hasn't stopped yet.
They define their style as native or well-adapted, water-wise and organic, a wildlife magnet, and a reflection of their home place.
I wanted it to look like Texas. I didn't want it to look like any other state where they grow the same type of plants.
Or even Houston, which is different. You know, a lot of people move here from Houston, and they bring their plants and their garden style here, and it's a totally different climate. It's not humid and wet. Houston gets a lot more rain than we do. It's a lot deeper soil. It drains. It floods a lot easier.
And there's no sense in amending your soil just to make these plants grow well. So it's easier just to put things here that will grow easily. We look for a lot of drought-tolerant plants, ones that love sun most of the day into the early evening. And you know, now we can find the plants. When we first moved here, or even when we lived in our other house, it was very difficult to find native plants to this area. And now we can really find them, and it's a lot of fun to go searching for new plants too. And I wanted a lot of diversity too, because if one plant decides that it's not going to like it here, you don't want all of them to die and you're left with nothing.
Diversity also means anticipation as one bloom cycle ends and another begins.
You want something to look at throughout the year.
From the beginning, Maria has been active in the Native Plant Society to learn and to share her progress.
Lots of trial
Lots
and
of trial and
error
error.
with plants being pulled out because they didn't work, and trying new ones.
You didn't leave them time enough to work.
Right.
Get too impatient.
Yeah, I get very impatient when things don't look good.
Been in there
at
3
first.
weeks. Pull it out.
Their design evolved as the best ones do.
Just by looking at it and go, oh, that'll look nice over there, or, you know, like these big rocks that we put around the swimming pool. I just pretty much pushed them up there with the tractor as far as they would go, and that's where they stayed.
Other stone projects, with professional help and Alan's additions, dealt with the lay of the land for their accessibility and to direct drainage away from the house. They replanted the fields with saplings and through their garden enticed the wildlife to return in greater diversity and numbers than before. It's been backbreaking and certainly ongoing work, but from their dreamland among the oaks, they met a challenge that's restored it with new significance.
We don't want to go anywhere. It's just such a beautiful backyard and so peaceful that it's really hard to want to go somewhere else. So with all the hard work, it's worth every minute of it.
Yeah. You can sit back and say it now, but while you're doing it, it's like, oh, God.
Well, we're going to move from a beautiful garden to talking about how to create beautiful gardens in your spaces, even if you find them uninspired currently. I'm joined by landscape architect Robert Leeper. And Robert, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
I've seen a lot of your work, at least in images, and I really admire the aesthetic you have. And I think it's going to be exciting for our viewers. And what we're going to be talking about here really is how to take a landscape that might be kind of uninspired and create something that's very new. And your aesthetic, I think, is very cool because it's bold, it's clean, very modern, but at the same time it's also restful and feels garden-like.
Well, thank you. That's a compliment.
And to me, that's a really great thing because so many people are looking for ways to simplify their lives,
Yes.
and this is one way to do it. Now, I know that a lot of your clients come to you with what probably are fairly generic landscapes. How do you begin the assessment of a transformation?
Generally, they call me because, it's a wreck or it hasn't quite worked out or there's nothing, you know, and they call and they want to know what I think. They've seen images on my website or they've been on a tour and seen the garden or driven past one. And it's a real, when I first walk up, it's a very intuitive experience for me. I almost immediately know what I would want to do, how I would want to change it. And I guess that just comes from years of practice. I think in thinking about how I do design and how I arrived at this aesthetic, it really comes from growing up in Louisiana with a house full of a bunch of kids and, kind of a wild, chaotic mess. It's like cleaning up
like a lot of
after
gardens I've seen.
7 kids is
Yeah,
a lot
right.
of work, and it can, that has always been, something in my life is that that attempt on my part to create a sense of order and cleanliness and sort of a peaceful experience. And so when
Something that a lot of people are pining for.
yeah, and it's become very, very popular in the last 10 years or so, sort of the modernism and the simplicity idea. And so that was sort of a natural thing for me to fall into because that's what I've been doing my whole life, is trying to create something of beauty that had a certain simplicity. And it's very hard to restrain yourself when you have so many favorite plants and you want to do so many things. But it's that paring down of, to get it to just the right level. And oftentimes I will work on a project and reducing it or just gently adding on to it until somehow it reaches that perfectly balanced point where I say stop, because it pleases my eye and it pleases the client's eye. And even the workers will tell me, this is it, stop right there.
That's good when they're giving you that kind of feedback. Now, I know that a really important starting place for a lot of architects is the home itself.
Very important.
Let's talk about that so that people can understand the concept of how do you connect what you're going to do in the garden to the house.
Well, when I went to school at LSU, when we were learning design, we learned the design comes from 3 places. It comes from the house itself, from the land and what it can really sustain and what it can really do in the environment, and the last thing is me and the homeowner's ideas about stylistically what we want to accomplish. You have to sort of start off with the house and the style of the house. There's no sense, what I'm doing is creating outdoor rooms. I'm expanding the square footage of the house. So to work against the style of the house doesn't make any sense. And many times you'll see a house of a certain style or with certain lines, and then new lines or new styles are introduced, and it can, eclectic can be you know, a troublesome thing. You know, either you can mix a few things and get it right, or you can mix a few things and it cannot go so right. So what I'm trying to do first is, and that's how it, when I walk up or drive up and I see the house, immediately my mind starts going, what's complementary to this architecture? How can I bring the style of the home all the way up to the street so that it's one unified piece? And that's what makes, I think, people respond to my landscapes, is they get it. They see it's not just a landscape thrown onto a house, it's a house that expands outward and creates these spaces and these rooms. Even the sidewalk walking up is a room in a sense. It's sort of a foyer or an entry to the house.
Right. There's your gardens have this very planar quality to them. There's this sense of, and I think this is where the serenity comes in. You use these kind of platforms of space and a lot of enclosure as well to create a sense of intimacy. A lot of times just the flat open spaces can feel exposed, but a little bit of enclosure is a wonderful thing, and really gives a sense of being in a room, which I know is very important. We've talked about it all the time when we talk about landscape design, but it can't be repeated enough, I think, when we're talking to people. It's like, think of us creating a series of outdoor rooms.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's what I want my clients and their friends to get out into the landscape. The majority of our experience with the landscape is either driving by or driving up to it or looking out the window. Part of my real goal in landscaping is I want to connect people to nature. And that may seem kind of odd given that a lot of my work is really modern and contemporary in style, but the reality is if I can bring them into the outdoors and then connect them to the plants, even if there are just a few of them there, then that's the job I want to do. I also am it's really important for me to create a space that's, you know, where people can go and enjoy being in the sun or listening to the birds. Those are really primitive human experience things, and that's a big part of landscaping, is making that connection for my clients, for all people.
You know, and I think people have misimagined what a garden's about. They imagine it's all about wildscape. But really, to me, and I think that Americans like to think they're very informal, that they're naturalistic, but if you give people the option of going into a cluttered kind of wildscape or a clearly defined landscape, I would say that probably 95% of people would go into the clearly defined, where's my entry point? Where can I be in this place?
A lot of visual clues that a garden designer, just by the way you orient your pathway, and you know, that's the old Japanese garden design of, you know, you have the pathway go this way for this focal point, and then it turns, and then there's another focal point. There's a lot of manipulation, if you will, of the experience. As the designer, you want people to see certain things, and you want them to experience certain things.
Right. Another thing I really love about your work is, and I think this is another thing that people need to bear in mind, and I often say this to folks, is that repetition of forms and use of geometry is really important. And there's one particular landscape we have some images of that's looks like a kitchen garden with little squares that I think is just super. I mean, really terrific.
Well, I think by using a lot of geometry and good lines, that actually creates sort of a calm feeling, you know, because it is ordered. And then the plants can sort of do their thing and grow out, and you really can see when you're looking at that composition, the juxtaposition between the order of the stonework and then perhaps the wildness of the plant. It really shows off well. It really shows that plant well.
Right. And you know, all this to me makes so much sense for the way that we live our lives today. And this comes back around to what I said at the beginning, that people are hungry for a less cluttered life, I think.
Yeah.
and our lives are hectic, and these kinds of spaces evoke within you, I think, a sense of order and peace and calm. But also there's the maintenance side of it as well.
Well, it's very easy, you know, if I use a lot of gravel on the ground surface to rake it up or blow the leaves and keep it clean. It's not as high of maintenance as a traditional garden. And one of the things, too, that I try to do with the hardscapes is create a space, a bench or something where people can go and sit and be in the space. That's a big part of it. I want people to be out in there.
You know, and the hardscape part of it invites people easily into the outdoors. Now, how can people be in touch with you?
They can go to my website. That's the ideal, easiest way, because then they can contact me through there by email or call me on the phone. But the website gives them a lot of not just visual information from photographs of different gardens, where they can see, and there's a variety. It's not just contemporary modern stuff. There's a lot of different styles going on there. But that's probably the best way, the website.
Well, and I know your work has been on tour and that people have experienced it that way. We really appreciate you making time to be with us today, and congratulations on great resume. It looks like a great portfolio of work.
Thank you very much. Really happy to be here.
Coming up next, it's Skip Richter.
Hello and welcome to Down to Earth. Leaf season opens in the Central Texas area this month and next month as leaves begin to drop from the trees and land on your lawn. Now, we always recommend that you gather those leaves for composting or for mulching. And this week's question regards, what about leaves that are diseased? Is it okay to use those in compost, or could you use them for mulch? Well, if the disease is from the plant that you're mulching it around, I wouldn't recommend it. I would go ahead and compost them, that would be okay, but not using them as mulch around the plant that they fell off of. But if they came from a different kind of plant, for example, using tree leaves to mulch around your roses and your vegetables and flowers, there's no disease concern there. What we find is that even in a specific disease like powdery mildew, the kind of powdery mildew or the strain that gets on, for example, a crepe myrtle is not the same strain that gets on a rose bush or some other plant like rock rose that's susceptible to powdery mildew. So you can go ahead and use those leaves as mulch or as compost without worrying about it, except around the exact plant that they came off of. And then, if you compost them, it's still okay. Don't ever let a leaf leave your property. They're valuable in terms of having nutrients in them. Mulching is always needed around here, and if you get tired of pulling weeds, just wish you had mulched more earlier, and you probably wouldn't be in that business at that time. Pulling weeds is something we can really avoid by mulching properly. And the winter weeds are sprouting now, so go ahead and get that mulch down. Our featured plant is the Monterey oak. Monterey oak is also called Mexican white oak, and being in the white oak group, it's resistant to oak wilt. If you want a fast-growing tree, this is an excellent choice. People often call and they want something that grows really fast but lives a long time. We often don't find those two characteristics going together, but in this case they do. Monterey white oak, provided a little moisture and fertilizer, will grow quite rapidly, and it'll fill in a large area. It makes a nice large shade tree like many of our other large oaks in the landscape. It's an excellent choice for our area because it is well adapted. It likes a little bit of soil depth, but it'll grow on a fairly marginal soil quite well too. The leaves come in different forms on the tree. They're a rather leathery leaf tree, and the new growth comes out kind of a bronzy color that I think is attractive also. So look for a Monterey oak if you're looking for a nice, long-lived shade tree that'll add value to your home for years to come. In the garden, it's time to clean up the garden. You know, if you've got some plants that died of perhaps a disease or insect infestation, go ahead and pull those out and either compost them or discard them. If you've got some dried fruit on your fruit trees, remove that, clean it up. Look for scale infestations that might need a little squirt of oil in order to shut them down. Gather those leaves that are falling, get them ready because we'll need them all next year for mulching. And if you've got any tender perennials, ones that don't really make it dependably over a period of time, you might want to mulch those a little extra carefully because with a little extra protection, they can make it through. Any vegetables and flowers for the cool season that you haven't planted, you can plant now. You know, it's an excellent time to still establish some of our cool season greens in the garden. We can continue planting those all through the winter season here. And things like pansies and viola that really like cooler conditions are going to be happy if you go ahead and get them in the ground now that things are cooling off a little bit. Any woodies that need moving around the landscape, this is the time to do it. There's no better time to get that done than now. For more plant tips or to contact the Extension office in your county, visit klru.org/CTG.
Thanks, Skip. Now let's check in with John Dromgoole for Backyard Basics.
Hello gardening friends, welcome to Backyard Basics. You ever had trouble getting some seeds to germinate? Put the seeds out there in the garden and nothing happens and you think, well, those are bad seeds, or I planted them too deep, something like that. There's actually something beyond that that really is helpful for the gardener to know when to plant the seeds. Frequently the calendar says early in the month, spring or fall, it doesn't make any difference. At a certain date it's time to put these in. But in reality the temperature can be way different than what the calendar says. So knowing the soil temperature increases our success rate when we do this type of work. Well, if it's in the springtime, for example, we have many things that might be going in: pole beans, tomatoes, jalapenos, cantaloupes, beans, all of these things would be going in at this time of the year. And the tomato germinates the very best at 85 degrees. So your success rate goes up dramatically if you can hit that spot. So the best thing to do is get yourself a little soil thermometer, just like this one here. A soil thermometer allows us to see the actual temperature in the soil. And with that going for you, now the germination rate is going to be much higher. And with the price of seeds today, we want to make sure that all of them germinate. We put the soil thermometer in at about a 3-inch depth, 2 to 3 inches deep, and then we just watch it for a little while. Usually it's about 3 minutes that we watch it, and then we see what the soil temperature is. So in the summer we have those warmer temperatures for certain varieties, but when we get to fall, some of these things like carrots and beets and sugar snap peas and spinach itself really don't germinate very well, nor does lettuce. But we want to do what the calendar says, and maybe it's not going to work that way, especially in some years where the summer lingers way off into the fall. And so we can increase the germination rate of some of these things by knowing the soil temperature. Well, where do you get a chart? Well, you could go to your computer and you could look online for it. You would just Google ideal soil temperature for flowers or for vegetables, and you'll get a whole bunch of resources right there. Now, one of the things that I found is when you buy one of these little thermometers, on the back of the packaging you'll find a chart that's similar to this one right here. And what this chart does, it gives us the minimum and the maximum that this temperature, this seed actually would germinate in. And there is the ideal temperature, like right in here on this one. We have the ideal temperature and then the range that they could work in, with the lower end and the higher end not being the most desirable, but it could work in there. So this is a wonderful tool, and many gardeners don't really know about this because you don't see much about it. But I know we've all had the experience of putting seeds in the ground and then not having them work. Spinach is a real good example of one of these problems. And so when we're putting spinach in the ground, we want to have it in that optimum range between 45 and 75 degrees, with 70 being the perfect spot to put these seeds in the ground. I also like to soak my spinach seeds. This is a variety called American spinach, and this American spinach is a real good one. It's a Savoyed leaf. It's a beautiful little spinach. And so I'll soak them overnight, put them in a bowl of water like this and let them soak a good 12 hours. You could get away with 8 also. And the seeds swell up and they get a lot of moisture in them. And so as a result, germination time is cut in half. So with that combination of the ideal soil temperature and then some seeds that have been soaked to germinate more quickly, and you can only do this with the bigger seeds. Lettuce seeds, carrot seeds, they're much too small and they soak up water quickly when you irrigate the garden. So we'll take some of these guys right here, just directly out of here, and place them in the ground. Just about, I like to do about 3 or 4 inches in case I have to thin, then we would come back and thin some of those out. You can also transplant them too. When these little seedlings are going, you could go in there and transplant them. Another thing to know is that transplants themselves would like a certain soil temperature. If it's too hot or too cold, the roots aren't going to spread out of these plants very quickly. So we can also look on these charts, and when we have a vegetable like this cabbage right here, you can plant in the spring and in the fall, you will be highly successful with those too. So these are some ideas that I thought I'd share with you, because sometimes people talk about not being very successful with their seed growing, and they don't really understand that the soil temperature is one of the most important parts of getting all of this going. So get yourself a little soil thermometer and you'll be much more successful with starting seeds directly in your garden. For Backyard Basics, I'm John Dromgoole. I'll see you next week.
For more tips and our weekly blog, check out klru.org/CTG. Next week, meet an artist who combines his craft with the natural world. Until then, I'll see you in the garden.
klru.org/CTG. It's where Central Texas gardeners can find tips, recipes, and anything they may have missed on the show. Keep up with the producer's garden on the new CTG blog and join the conversation by posting your own comments, questions, and garden pictures. klru.org/CTG. Central Texas Gardening Online.
Visit klru.org/CTG to learn more about today's program, upcoming events, and to sign up for our electronic newsletter. Check out John's how-to tips and visit Trish's Corner for ideas inside and out. Get growing at klru.org/CTG.